Ну, а ми переходимо до
And we're moving to our next point of our agenda. And we're now joined by Barrie. And we have Maryna, who is going to be moderating this session and helping us with questions. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to introduce to you our great speaker, Barrie J Roberts from the United States. She's an expert in dispute resolution, co-founder of InterpretADR. She has worked on alternative dispute resolution in 2 courts of California, and she's an English language teacher. For about 20 years, she's been delivering courses on mediation for international students. Together with her partner, an interpreter and mediator, Maryna Dzeveliuk, they've designed and developed the program, ADR Interpreter Program, for better cooperation between interpreters and mediators. She has recently developed an English language course for alternative dispute resolution. She already delivered 2 courses for Ukrainian mediators. I myself had an honor to pass those courses, so I want to thank you so much, Barrie, for this. She's an author of 3 books in the English language for dispute resolution. So today we await very relevant topic, because when mediation participants need language support, qualified interpreters are irreplaceable, because it is them who bring in something that no other people can do, nor AI, because people are sensitive to regular, normal communication. They can help build trust and abide by the ethical principles. But who is a qualified interpreter in mediation, and should we ignore artificial intelligence? So there's going to be more detail from Barrie. She's going to have an interactive presentation where we're going to investigate some of those issues and possible solutions as well. So it is my honor and pleasure to give the floor over to Barrie. So you'll be able to ask questions again after the presentation is over. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Maryna. I think you just gave my whole presentation. I think we can stop there and take questions. You summed it up very beautifully. Now, I'd like to thank you, Maryna, and I would like to thank our interpreter. I'll have a few more things to say about the interpreter in a moment. And I would especially like to thank Louisa for having the vision and the interest in this often neglected but very important topic, especially as it relates to culture. And I would like to take a moment and give special greetings to my mediation in English colleagues. I see many of you out there today. I miss you. I hope you're all well and safe. And thank you for being here today. You've heard enough from me and you've come back for more. So thank you for that. In a minute, I'm going to change the title of my presentation. I think you can see it on the screen. Maybe I'm going to add 3 words, and maybe some of you can start thinking about which 3 words I need to add to cause us all a lot of problems. I think my job today is to cause us all a lot of problems and controversy that we can enjoy exploring together. So what 3 words do you think we should add to that title? You can put it in the chat, or you can make your own notes. And but first, before we move on to that, I'd like to also ask you to put a couple things in chat. May we move to the next slide? I have some questions for all of you out there. We'll come back to this slide in a moment. Am I doing the slides? Thank you. Audience participation with a plus or a minus. Number 1, mediators out there. Have you ever worked with an interpreter in mediation? So just give us a 1+ if yes, or a 1- if not. Interpreters, have you ever interpreted at a mediation? Another question for interpreters. I hope you're out there. I need you. Have you ever received mediation training? And if you have, I'm going to want to hear more about that. And number 4, mediators. Do you feel confident mediating in more than 1 language? So that's a different question, not about interpreters. Okay, I see the pluses and minuses coming in. And I'd like to turn to the next slide for a little more involved answer, short answers. Mediators, when a party needs language assistance, what's your biggest concern about using AI? or using an interpreter? We just need a few words about your gut reactions. And if you're not a mediator interpreters, what's your biggest concern about interpreting at mediations? And the last question was for everybody. What questions do you have? What do you hope to have answered today?
У нас є багато відповідей у чаті, думки
We have
розділились.
so many
частина-
answers in the chat, and there's a diversity of opinions. Part of them answered for interpreters, part of them explained they distrust AI. We have answers both in English and Ukrainian, so there's a lot of them.
Great. Maryna, if you would like to share some of the answers in Ukrainian, please do.
Так, більшість каже, да, є інформація про те, що хтось не
There's
довіряє
a lot of
штучному
information that somebody distrusts AI. Some people really don't because they give preference to interpreters. In most cases, it's 50-50. There's a complete split of opinions.
Excellent.
So people trust more a live interpreter, a human being, versus AI.
Very interesting. Okay. All right, let's look at this slide for a moment. I could spend the whole hour taking this slide apart, but I'm going to, did anyone suggest three words to add? Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. Can we go back to the title slide? Slide 1. Thank you so much. Are there three words you can think of to add to this slide, to the title? Has anyone written anything?
Поки що ще отримали відповіді з приводу
We're
попереднього
still getting
запитання.
answers for the previous question. Waiting more?
Пан Олег Тюрін написав нам, як
Oleg
ми можемо
Turin
використовувати штучний інтелект.
Answered, but he asked, how can we use AI at all?
Назви.
I think that was his message.
Ola, great question. We'll talk about it.
AI cannot replace living interpreters.
В чаті пишуть про те, що штучний інтелект не може
They say, yeah,
перекладу термінів,
sometimes AI does not know how to translate some of the concepts.
термінів через
And sometimes translation is incorrect. That's why people do not trust it enough.
Okay, these are great answers. I'm going to tell you something that you may not like to hear. The three words I'm going to add are what skillful interpreters can and cannot bring to the cross-cultural mediation table. For mediators who know nothing about interpreting, I have to burst our bubble here today. Interpreters are constrained by ethical rules. In the US, and by the way, I only barely know about US rules. There may be different rules for those of you who are working in other places, so I'm going to focus on US rules. The problem we have is that there are no ethical rules in the US that have been formulated to guide interpreters in mediation. We have ethical rules for court. We have ethical rules for healthcare. We have ethical rules for all kinds of contexts, but not mediation. So we have a big problem. And to my wonderful interpreter, I'm going to say it's the wild, wild west, and hope you can do something with that. Because right now we have every interpreter left to his or her own devices. Another great idiom for interpreters, I apologize. So we're going to talk about that. And speaking of interpreters, I want to say something. In my experience, interpreters are the most underappreciated and misunderstood profession. They're often put in impossible and awkward positions, like right now, This is the first time I'm giving a presentation about interpreting that is being interpreted. And I don't know how often interpreters interpret presentations about interpreting. It's intimidating for me, and I don't know how pleasant it is for them. But you know, as a mediator, I want to check in with the interpreter about everything I say. I wonder what they're thinking. I defer to them on so many things, but I am pretty sure they are not focused on their opinions. They are focused on doing their job, which we are going to discuss. So this raises an interesting point about interpreters and mediators working together, which we must do. In mediation culture, as I said, we like to include everyone. We want to build rapport and warmth, encourage every voice to be heard, engage. But at least in the US, interpreter culture and ethics are just about the opposite of that, at least while they're on the job. Off the job, another story. But on the job, many gray areas and many opinions, but they must stick to their job. So how can we all work together on this? I do want to say a few things about some of the other words on the, and by the way, I'm hoping somehow our interpreter or other interpreters will set us straight or join the conversation throughout and at the end. I do want to say a few more things about this slide. I am not an expert on any of these things. AI, I can't say I'm an expert on it, although full disclosure, I did use AI to help prepare for this, and with very funny and sobering results, which I'll share with you. Cross-culture, we have experts before me, after me all day. I do not say that I'm an expert on cross-cultural issues, but what I have been doing is thinking a lot about the issue of interpreters at mediation with my partner. And now if we can move on to, I think it's slide 5. We got so stuck on slide 1. I'm not surprised, still here. There we go. There we go. State and immigration courts. And in fact, that's why she couldn't be with us today. She's busy at work in the federal court, but she is also a mediator, and a very successful mediator, because she had to deal with me for many years working together on this project. If we can look at the next slide. Oh.
Так, буквально кілька секунд ми вас не чули.
Yeah, we could not hear you for like 10 to 15 seconds when you introduced your partner, but already tried to translate everything that the slide says.
Thank you very much. We can move on to the next slide. So this is the program she and I worked on together, training interpreters and mediators to work together. Now someone is saying they can't see the slide. I'm sorry about that. Do we need to fix something?
Ми бачимо ваш слайд, все добре, можливо,
Yeah,
це
we can see your
індивідуально.
slide. Maybe
Okay, good.
you can't see it, but we can see the InterpretADR
No,
slide.
I thought someone in chat wrote that they couldn't see it. But I'm assuming it's not a problem for others, so let's go on. So we can go to the next slide, please. So Maria also does podcasts about all kinds of topics about interpreting. She even interviewed me about interpreting in mediation, which I will just tell you, we think we are creating this field together, interpreting in mediation. At least in the US, I'd be delighted to hear from others throughout the world that you're all on top of it. You have guidelines, you have ethics, you're done, and we're so far behind you. I would be delighted to hear that. But in the US, we feel like we're the pioneers trying to apply interpreting skills to the world of mediation. So this podcast that I have for you on the screen is about AI in interpreting in general, not applied to mediation. And if we could go to the next screen, in that podcast, if you're interested in the topic in general, AI and interpreting, the next screen shows you an organization that has been busy at work on this topic. Of course, it's of great concern to interpreters. Whether AI should or shouldn't be relied on, we have to live in reality. So if we could go to the next slide. This is an organization that is exploring guidance for interpreters. I hope it applies globally. I honestly don't know, but you can take a look at their website and get involved with them if you're interested. I'll tell you a little bit more about some of the questions they ask us to consider if we are inclined to use AI in interpretation. All right, next slide, please. So let's get on the same page about mediation. I'm assuming that most of us mediators have some kind of picture like this in our minds when we say mediation. But the one question for us is, and I think that the IMI panelists raised this question as well. When we say mediation, we know what we mean, but not only does the party know what we mean, does the interpreter know what we mean? So for example, are they translating mediation as arbitration? Are they translating it as settling? And what form and sense of the word? Like, this is where your case gets settled. The mediator will settle your case. So I want to ask you a question, and you can put your answer in the chat. Whose job is it to ensure that all participants understand the term mediation in the same way? Is it the interpreter's job or is it the mediator's job? What would you say? Let's see some answers in chat. You just have to say mediator or interpreter.
Так, вже отримуємо відповіді.
Yeah, we
для
can
того.
see answers coming. Mediator, both of them.
Okay, so far you're getting A+, my friends out there. It's the mediator's job. And for an interpreter who has not had the benefit of mediation training and knows nothing about it, they don't know what they don't know. It's not their fault. They don't know what they don't know. They're doing their best finding an equivalent in their language. So it's on us to make sure we give the interpreter what the interpreter needs to do their job. That's our job. Okay, but we also don't know what we don't know. We don't know how that word would sound. So we'll talk about some solutions to that problem. And by the way, speaking of basic terms, I'm going to use the word interpreter because in the US, we use interpreter for spoken English and translator for written in translating. And to make matters more confusing, we use sight translation when an interpreter must quickly, I don't know, interpreter translates, somebody will shoot me, I don't know who, when an interpreter must translate a document into spoken English, not in writing. So I asked Maria, my partner, do I need to explain this to the interpreter? And she said, no. The interpreter, unlike the word mediation, the interpreter will do what needs to be done with my use of interpreter in this context. And I wish I could apologize to the interpreter. This must be driving you crazy. But I'm going to keep saying interpreter because that is how I have been trained. And I'm pretty sure the interpreter will interpret that as translate. All right, let's move on. This is what happens, mediators, when we start thinking about overthinking the language issues. And we realize we need to help the interpreter more than we think. All right, let's move on to the next slide. What problems are we trying to solve here? In my opinion, we are trying to solve the problem, how can the mediation proceed as if we didn't need language assistance? And whom or what can mediators and parties trust to provide that language assistance when we do need it? If you have different ideas about the problems we're trying to solve, please tell me, put it in chat. But let's assume we can agree that these are two problems, and we can move to the next slide. And let's think about the party's point of view. The IMI group did a great job. Oh, go back one more, please. Back to the parties. Oh. All right, we can stay here. We can stay here, no problem. I'm going to ask you what's really going on for mediators when one party needs language assistance. I'm going to, oh, please don't go there yet. Thank you. If we apply our own skills on ourselves, if we go beneath our positions and look at our emotions and our interests and our needs, I tried to do this on our behalf. What's really going on for us when one party needs language assistance? This is what goes on for me. Your experience may be different. For me, number one, denial. I'm going to assume it's all fine because the interpreter is translating everything exactly, right? So I'm just not going to think about it. I'm just going to do my job as usual and assume everything's, what I'm transmitting is being conveyed and understood exactly as if it were all in English. That's my first problem, denial. But underneath that, I actually have some anxiety, a feeling of vulnerability and lack of control. And as we all know, mediators, we want to control the process. But can we really do it when we're not sure what's going on in terms of the language? And of course, we obsess about our language as mediators sometimes. I'll speak for myself. Am I using the right word? Am I using the right tone? Am I using the right idiom? And am I telling a joke that I need to be understood in a certain way? And is the interpreter, can the interpreter do all that? Absolutely not. And I shouldn't expect it. So yes, I have lost control in some ways. I'm sure we're all concerned about cultural misunderstandings and hoping that unlike AI, the interpreter can take care of that. And that's why I added the words, what they can and cannot do. And we're concerned about professionalism. Can we do our work? And maybe underneath it all, a fear of causing harm. So you may have a different sense of your concerns, but these are mine. Okay, let's move on now. And let's talk about some options. What can we do? What are our choices when a party needs language assistance? And now we can move to the next slide. It's going to be blank lines for you all to start thinking about when language assistance is needed for a mediation. What are our options? Well, I came up with 5. Let's see what you can come up with. Please put some in chat. So you're the mediator. One party doesn't speak, or you need an interpreter for yourself. You need language assistance. Oops, I gave one away. When language assistance is needed, it could be the mediator. So the answers are interpreter.
Так, як експертна думка вказують про це.
There's expert opinion.
Okay. Team of different translator, that's interesting.
There's an issue of safeguards so that mediation does not turn out to be corruption. And AI can be one of those safeguards, they say.
Good point.
Вказали також про те, що штучний інтелект може бути як запобіжник корупції. Наприклад, у перекладі.
Yeah, again, this is said again what I've already translated.
Okay. Collective consent. It's very interesting, collective consent, yeah. Okay, I'm going to give you my options and I would love to discuss yours later. Let's move on to the next slide and you can see what I have listed. And this is like brainstorming, right? I'm just brainstorming options for to be modified and deleted, just brainstorming options. So one option is AI. Another option people often use is bilingual people who offer to translate. Another option, any trained, experienced interpreter or translator. Interpreters trained in mediation. And my last option is no interpreter. We just use active listening as usual when mediators and parties are reasonably fluent in a common language. They can work together to create understanding. And I have personal experience with my wonderful Ukrainian colleagues in our mediation in English course, where that is what we prepared to do. So in some cases, that will be the best option. But what happens when it isn't? So let's go to the next slide and look at AI a little bit more. So we have a spectrum of options with AI. It's not all or nothing. We could use 100% AI. We could use AI with live human validation. We could use human interpreters who get AI assistance, and I think one of the comments suggested that, or we could use 100% human and no AI. So it's not all or nothing. And let's look at the next slide. The Safe AI Task Force that I mentioned before says, if you are inclined to use AI in any way for interpreting, these are just a few questions to burst our bubble, to make us less confident about using it. We need to know who created it, how was it tested, was there human oversight, and will there be human oversight in the process of using it? Who or what is accountable for errors and problems? And is the information protected? What about confidentiality? Where does it go? And we can add even more questions. How can we be sure the AI is neutral, which is a very important point for not only mediators, but interpreters as well. So this is just to start worrying you, giving you some anxiety about using AI. Nevertheless, it's a fact of life and we cannot ignore it even if we think we should. So we'll talk about that shortly. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So here are my responses to my brainstorming. You can see I did all this in the privacy of my own mind, brainstormed and evaluated. AI, I'm going to say not 100%, and we should leave it to the interpreter to determine the use he or she would like to make of AI. That's my opinion. Bilingual people who offer to translate in a mediation, I'm going to say hard no. 100% no on that. We'll see why. Number 3, any trained, experienced interpreter translator. My answer, not ideal, and we'll see why. And number 4, interpreters trained in mediation, yes, plus mediators trained to work with interpreters. To me, this is the gold standard that we're looking for. Of course, my partner, Maria, is the gold standard because she's both an interpreter and a mediator. And if we could have more of those, maybe IMI can be helpful in that regard. To me, that would be amazing. Not that the mediator is going to do both at the same time, or that the interpreter is going to do both at the same time. Absolutely not. I'm talking about the depth of understanding of each separate job. When Maria interprets, she interprets. When she mediates, and she will call on an interpreter. We're not going to blend the two jobs, at least in the US. That is not really the guidance that an interpreter would get, maybe different elsewhere. Okay, let's look at the next slide. And by the way, all of your answers and challenges to my points are most welcome as we try to solve these problems together. So let's look at the interpreter's job. What would you say the interpreter's main job is? And interpreters, you might get a laugh out of this or a cry out of this. What do we think, mediators, when we have an interpreter with us? What is their job? What would you say? Feel free to put it in chat, and if that's too scary, you can just make a note to yourself. If you don't want to be out on the limb, it's a hard question. Make sure everybody understands. That's pretty good. But I might have to question the make sure part. I agree that would be a goal. What was this one in Ukrainian?
В точному перекладі. Робота перекладача в точному перекладі. Точно передати інформацію
To
медіатора.
provide accurate information delivered by the mediator. He needs to understand the topic.
Very good. Easier said than done, but very good. Give correct understanding. Okay. Let's translate the
Задача,
understanding.
так, задача одна, щоб захистити одну із сторін.
One task is to protect one of the sides, to accurately render the meaning and emotional component of it attached to it.
Я вам читаю відповіді, які українською мовою.
These are the answers in Ukrainian that I'm going through in the chat. And of course, the ones in English you can read yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, let us take translate different documents. Yeah, okay, very good. Let's look at the next slide. And I want to quickly talk about 6 common myths about interpreters, and this is what mediators should know. And I do want to say, if you're like me a few years ago, I never thought about it. I just had a lot of assumptions, and now I've seen the light, and I would like to share that with you. You may already know about this, maybe you can, if so, you can see if you agree. Okay, let's look at the first myth about interpreters. We can go through these fairly quickly. So the next slide. Myth 1, anyone who speaks 2 languages can be an interpreter. Oh, and by the way, this is from AI. AI actually knows something about mediation and interpreting. We should all be very interested in what AI tells us. Not that AI can do it, but what AI can put together. Reality, professional interpreters have specialized training in all of these things: accuracy, cultural nuance, ethics, memory skills. Just knowing 2 languages doesn't ensure effective or accurate interpretation. Untrained interpreters, like somebody's child or sister-in-law or friend or neighbor, well, they speak both languages. Let's just bring them in. They may omit sensitive details, distort information, struggle with terminology, be very biased towards the person they're interpreting for. Many problems. The interpreter code of ethics should be very near and dear to our hearts as mediators. The interpreter code of ethics: neutrality, confidentiality. Okay, let's look at myth 2. Next slide, please. All interpreters are the same and can work in any setting. So, interpreting requires subject matter expertise. There are many different types of interpreting. Right now, I'm assuming we have an excellent conference interpreter. I don't know if that our interpreter, and you correct me later, would be comfortable without training in interpreting in a medical or hospital setting between, among doctors, patients, family members, nurses. I don't know if that would be comfortable for our conference interpreter. There's school, there's immigration, there's courtroom, there are attorney-client communications, and of course, there's negotiation and mediation. Can any interpreter do all of that? We have to really look at the context of the setting that requires the interpreting. What are the goals of that setting? What are the concepts, the terminology, the communication styles, the nuances? So I'm hoping that you're starting to think we cannot just grab any interpreter. It doesn't put them in a comfortable professional situation. And I'm not sure it's going to benefit the mediation, could cause more harm. I'll be interested in any remarks from interpreters on that. Feel free to challenge me on that. Myth 3, and of course it may be different outside the US. I don't know. Let's look at the next slide, myth 3. Interpreting, oh, I'm sorry, this is not myth 3, this is more on myth 2. Interpreting for court versus mediation communication styles. I just want to give one example because this is something mediators can certainly understand. If we think about court, the goals of court, it's adversarial. There's a focus on transcripts for appeals. And again, I'm talking about the US and maybe different elsewhere. There's a judge or jury who's making the decision. In some, the communication is rigid and formulaic to meet the goals of that setting. All right, but as we all know as mediators, we're informal, we're collaborative, we're exploring, we're thinking out loud, we're using active listening, we're reframing. It's a very different communication style. Can we expect an interpreter to just jump in and get all that? And especially when they think their ethical duties require them to use the rigid formulaic communication of court, if they are court interpreters. Oh, it's really too much to ask them to just suddenly understand mediation and the nuances of our communication styles, let alone the actual words. So next slide, please. Let's take a quick look at that. Next slide, please. So here are just some examples, and I think some of you wrote some of this in. An interpreter who is not trained for mediation might be very surprised with all the emotions and the venting and having to keep boundaries with a party. It's a whole other topic I don't have time for it. The mediator's role, the mediation process, and some mediation terms, self-determination. If we say that, can we assume that the interpreter understands it the same way we mean it? Confidentiality, you know, interpreters have their own use of the word confidentiality. What about just the basic words, collaborate and compromise? We know what we mean. Let's look at the next slide. Here's compromise. Let's meet halfway. Sounds reasonable, but is let's meet halfway positive or negative in this particular context? How can we expect the interpreter to translate or interpret compromise the way a party means it in a particular context if they haven't thought this through? And it's a very quick, there's no time to really think. There's no time to check AI, right? They just have to do it. Okay, next slide. I think we're on myth 3 at this point. Myth 3, interpreters translate word for word. So maybe we can just relax. What's the problem? They'll just translate word for word. Actually, this is a myth. Interpreting is not simply repeating word for word in another language. So why not just use AI? This is what people who don't know might think, because they're thinking if they're traveling and they need to talk to a waiter or the hotel manager, they can just pull out AI and solve the problem. But mediation is not a transactional context. We have a lot more going on than what color shoes do you want to buy, or are they too tight, right? Maybe we could use AI for things like that. But as AI itself will tell you, trained interpreters convey meaning, tone, intent, and context, not just literal words. Word for word interpreting often leads to confusion or miscommunication. And interpreters, please be aware, even AI knows that. Not that AI can do it, but AI knows it. And I'm using knows in quotes. Let's look at the next slide. There are a lot of ways to say the same thing. So this is just one example. If the mediator says mediation is an informal process, in Ukrainian, Japanese, Chinese, Spanish, Persian, I'm sorry about the indenting, that has no meaning. Is informal in all of these languages what we mean by it? For example, is it informal less important, not respectful? Is it a positive or negative thing in an informal process? And what are we really trying to convey? What's our point when we say that? That's just one example of translating mediation culture to others. How about the next slide? What about this? What if a party says, I love my friend, but he's not reliable? So in English, we would be okay with this. But in other languages, there are many words for love, many words for friend, many words for reliable. What does this mean? And in the context. All right, next slide. And why not verbatim? Okay, so here's one answer to the question, what is the interpreter's job? We're trying to put participants in the same position they'd be in if they were all communicating in the same language. And I want to skip to the last two bullets. The interpreter is conveying all this from each speaker's point of view, expressing the deepest empathy for each speaker without cleaning up their language, without dumbing down their language. It's like the interpreter is an actor playing the part of the participant, inhabiting the participant. Well, let's look at the next slide. So this is kind of funny, but it's something like this. You see the man sticking out his tongue. How is that translated? Look at the translator. Now, we don't expect the interpreter to actually mimic body language. So this is an exaggeration to make a point. The translator is expressing the party's communication exactly from the party's point of view. That's really an interpreter's job. Without any opinions, without any bias, without any summaries, deleting or adding, that's it. All right, let's look at the next slide. It may look something like this. So if we assume that the interpreter is the person who is professionally dressed in the suit, and the mediator is informally dressed, like some of us are, and the party who needs assistance has its back to us, it's something like this. We can see that the interpreter is trying to express the mediator's communication. And note the seating arrangements, because this is another big issue. Note that the interpreter has not inserted himself between the mediator and the party, because an interpreter who understands mediation is going to try to promote rapport between the mediator and the party, not between the interpreter and the party. This is very important for for interpreters to understand about mediation and their role. Oh, I really like this photo because it says a lot. Of course, it's a stock photo. I don't know what's really going on here, but I'm just using it as an example. All right, next slide, please. So the interpreter's duty is to transmit tone and register. So for example, the mediator may say, I would now like to invite the parties to speak with each other. The interpreter interprets that with that level of formality and politeness. And the party replies, I'm not going to talk to that creep. Well, the interpreter also has to interpret that exactly as the party intends it to sound. Not polite, not conducive to resolving disputes. Nevertheless, that's what it is. And the interpreter's job is to switch back and forth to convey this. Now, here we have something in Spanish. A party in Spanish may use usted, which is formal you. And of course, English, we don't have that. We only have one you. But the interpreter in English might say, sir, you, to convey the respect and formality. Some interpreters would do that, some would not. There's no clear answer, but it just gives you an idea of transmitting something. All right, next slide, please. I love this cartoon. Here we have a dog interpreter whispering to the speaker. You'll have to phrase it another way. They have no word for fetch. Trying to explain fetch to a cat. I love this cartoon. The issue is, I think the term for interpreter says functional equivalent. There is no functional equivalent of the word fetch for cats because cats do not have the concept of fetch. So what is an interpreter to do? Let's look at the next slide. Now I'm taking a risk here because I don't really understand this in Ukrainian, but I'm sure you will all correct me or help me. What if a party in Ukrainian says, I made a pisanka for her. She gave me an Amazon gift certificate. Okay, and let's say the AI interprets it, I made a decorative egg for her. My friends in Ukrainian, does that really convey what's going on here? my understanding is it's a lot more than a decorative egg. You can tell me later, but I'm just trying to talk about what do we do. In English, we wouldn't understand decorative egg. Pisanka, we don't know the meaning of it and why it's being compared to an Amazon gift certificate. Okay, what about in Spanish? A party may say in Spanish, I said, come here, gordita. AI in English gives us, come here, chubby girl. Sounds possibly insulting. But the interpreter in English who gets it might say, I said, come here, sweetie, or darling or cutie, knowing that in this context, chubby girl is a term of endearment, not an insult. Now, some interpreters will just go ahead and do that, and some will not. And we do not have guidance for them necessarily. Everyone's figuring it out for themselves. All right, next slide. Interpreters will clarify or fix things themselves. I just want to say, I have a quote from Maria, MCW. The mediator cannot expect the interpreter to jump in and do the mediator's job, but an interpreter may ask for clarification. So for example, if I'm the mediator and I say, I really think you should consider your BATNA. The interpreter may reply, the interpreter does not understand the term BATNA. And note that the interpreter is referring to herself in the third person. That is how my partner Maria was trained. But Maria also told me an interpreter may or may not point out the need for clarification and wait and see what happens. There could be confusion and chaos, and it's the mediator's job to solve that problem. Differences of opinion. Okay, next slide. And let me say the reason is that there's no code of ethics for interpreters in mediation. We could create guidelines and give interpreters some guidance about how to switch from the court interpreting mentality to the mediation mentality. And actually, this is one of my goals for giving this presentation so that we can think together about it. And while I was listening to the IMI presentation, I had some very good ideas about how we could possibly work together to do that. But here we have a misunderstanding about what it means for an interpreter to be a cultural broker. As I've said, they have ethical boundaries, and it's a huge topic, and we can't solve it now. Let's move on to the next slide. That's a 2-hour presentation in itself. And here we have some times when it's inappropriate. And as we all know, if we look at the third bullet, we cannot assume all members of a culture think, act, and use language the same way. So even if an interpreter felt there was a misunderstanding, how could she be sure she understands what the problem is for this particular person, even understanding something about their culture, even being from that culture? Can she be sure? Okay, next slide, please. So here is an example of something that could happen, and I think it's related to what we heard from one of the IMI panelists. The interpreter, so let's say that you're in a caucus with a party, a tenant in this case, who does not seem to want to participate at all. And one reason the mediator thinks that is that the tenant is looking down, not giving eye contact. And we talked about eye contact in the IMI presentation. So the interpreter might say, excuse me, the interpreter would like to briefly clarify something. Mediator, yes, go ahead. As the interpreter, I am neutral and do not speak for either party, but a brief cultural note may help the process. In tenant's culture, avoiding direct eye contact, especially with authority figures, in this case, they're referring to us, the mediator, is often a sign of respect, not avoidance or disrespect. I will now interpret that in the tenant's language and then continue interpreting. Mediator, thank you for clarifying. Please continue. That gives you one example of how this could go. All right, next slide. So let's just move on to the next slide. That's more about cultural intervention. I love this, and I wish we would have time to talk about it. That would be difficult. This is a famous Japanese statement, and if we have any Japanese speakers, I would love to hear from you on this. let's say a Japanese speaker says in a mediation, that would be difficult. I'm pretty sure I have the Japanese right because I got it from AI. So how could I be wrong? In the context of mediation, AI says it's best translated as that would be difficult. Next slide. AI gives a helpful explanation, however. This translation preserves the diplomatic and indirect tone of the original Japanese, blah, blah, blah. It typically means a polite refusal or resistance to a proposal, a way to say no without directly rejecting the other party. In other words, that would be difficult could, and probably does, mean no. How is that going to get translated? Let's look at the next slide. An interpreter with mediation training might get this point across with firm tone, clear body language, showing in the tone that the term that would be difficult means no, without, but leaving the words that would be difficult. In fact, that's what Maria, my partner, said she would do. But, and she said how can she be sure they mean no? It's not on her, it's on the mediator to sort this out. That's what Maria said. So she said she would let it go for a while and then see, is the Japanese speaker making dinner reservations, packing up the briefcase out the door? And is the American at the whiteboard brainstorming solutions to overcome the difficulty? She said at that point, she might say, the interpreter would like to make a clarification. In this context, the speaker is using the polite form of refusal. They mean no, though they're expressing it in a culturally appropriate, indirect way. That's something an interpreter could do. All right, next slide, please. Myth 6, you should speak directly to the interpreter. No, we talked about that before. Everybody's speaking as if the interpreter weren't there. All right, for many reasons. Next slide, please, because we are getting close to the end. Summing up the interpreter's job as if everyone were understanding each other in the same language. Can AI do that? Can any interpreter do that? I think we see that the answers are more complicated than we might think. You know what? Because we have 5 minutes left, I think we're going to move very quickly. My administrator colleague, can we just move to the end? Keep going. I do want to point, yeah, keep going, keep going, keep going. And now stop. If just go back one more. Yeah, please go back one more. So I want to tell you something funny. When I asked AI, why can't AI interpret at mediations? AI responded, why AI can't interpret mediations yet? That's what AI responded. I hope you're all having the hair go up on your arms like I am. And then they gave these helpful reasons, and we can look at the next slide, which we already know, but AI knows it too. All right, next slide, please. So how can mediators and interpreters work together? Well, we can understand that we have some shared goals and some shared ethics. Next slide. We also have different roles, right? Interpreters do not mediate, mediators do not interpret. Next slide. We can learn about each other's professions. Next slide. And one of the, we need mediators, we need to respect interpreters' professional boundaries. Next slide. Yeah, but I'm not going to have time to go through all this, but it gives you the idea of problems in interpreting. Next slide, please. And the next slide after that. Those are really good. These are really fun, but let's keep going. This is a very important recommendation that I'm going to make, whether the mediators and interpreters are or are not trained to work together. There's the opportunity for a pre-session briefing. There are many issues for mediators and interpreters to discuss together before the session. Very specific concerns for the interpreter, such as breaks and signals to signify that someone needs to slow down, probably like me. etc. So let's move on, just for the sake of time. Okay, let's move on. We don't have time to talk about the briefing. Oh my goodness. Let's move to the next slide. This gives you an idea. All right, next slide. Reality check for interpreters. AI is a fact of life. People are ignorant about whether we can trust it or not. Some people just trust it. We need to deal with it. That's my point there. The next slide. This is a reality check for interpreters. AI knows a lot. Right now, they can't do what needs to be done with it, but they know a lot. And they can combine information about mediation and culture in explanations. So I'm worried that it's only a matter of time until they can do more than that. And so my question to interpreters, can you do all that? Can you do all that right now without any training in mediation? All right, next slide. Okay, we'll have to move on. We don't have time. And I'm going to say the gold standard to answer my own questions is to have interpreters who are trained in mediation, like Maria. If we can't have that, they're trained to apply skills to mediation, trained to use AI appropriately. And mediators, it's on us. We need to learn how to work appropriately with interpreters. And I'm going to suggest mediation briefings and inviting an interpreter to give a professional introduction at the start of a mediation. And let's go to the next slide. Oh my goodness, self-promotion, shameless self-promotion. So Maryna mentioned that I wrote 3 books. This book helps us understand getting to yes, helps non-native speakers of English understand getting to yes, page by page, almost word by word. I walk you through that book. It's helpful for interpreters to learn the fundamentals of interest-based negotiation through getting to yes. And the next slide, even more shameless self-promotion. This is my new book that's coming out next week, English for Dispute Resolution. It helps non-native speakers of English learn about negotiation and mediation in user-friendly English so that they can use it in English. And next slide, if you're interested in that book, here you can get a discount code. That's why I'm showing it to you. You can get a discount code. I'm sure we'll make that available to you later. And just one more thing, I think. Next slide. And then we will wrap it up. Oh, but next slide, I'm sorry, you already got enough of that. Oh, okay, my website. So this is a way to contact me. If you have any interest or disagreements in anything that I talked about today, or if you are a mediator who would like some training in interpreting, or vice versa, an interpreter who would like some training. But what I really got from listening to the IMI presentation is that we need some guidance worldwide. Worldwide guidance. And I think maybe today I gave you enough problems to think about that you might agree with me on that. So I'm going to end it there. And I want to thank you for the honor of being able to share these ideas with you. Not that I solved any problems. I think I caused some problems. And I want to end by saying, let's hope we can have these conversations together in Ukraine someday soon. I would love to be with you. All right. Thank you.
Дякуємо надзвичайно вам, Баррі, за
Thank
вашу
you so much, Barrie, for your outstanding presentation, for this absolutely relevant information. You can see in the chat that our participants are just amazed by your presentation and the slides. We have received so many questions about what you were talking about. They would like to get your presentation if possible. We also have questions, by the way, so if possible, let's move to the Q&A. Can you tell me how to interpret those words which are not available in a foreign language, but they're so important to understand the context and build understanding with the parties? Sometimes there is law that prescribes some specific terms and concepts. That was a question from Mark.
Okay, so if you don't have the words, you don't have the words. What can you do? During a mediation briefing, ideally, this would be discussed and worked out. So for example, the mediator would tell the interpreter, this is the case type. these are the terms that are probably going to come up. I want to give you time to think about how you're going to interpret them, and let's talk about how you're going to interpret them. So for example, if we have people who come from villages who don't have courtrooms, they're not familiar with trials, they're not even familiar with the term guilt, right? Or they have a different sense of it. This really needs to be thought out in advance. So
Yeah.
there's no easy answer. There's no word to substitute.
Дякую. Скажіть, будь ласка, як ви радите вирішувати
Thank you. But how would you
ситуації?
advise to resolve a case when interpretation affects the emotional perception of the party, and this triggers misunderstanding between the parties? What would you do in such a situation?
Well, we can't have that. There needs to be a break, and we need to reset, because that is a very important point and a huge danger. Now, to some extent, we can all see for ourselves what the emotions are going on. However, there are cultural differences in emotions. So if somebody's very emotional and the other person is not, there could be a misunderstanding about what's going on. So this needs to be cleared up. But we cannot ask the interpreter to be a cultural anthropologist and opine and pontificate about this. So we may have to find ways to give brief explanations. In this culture, this means this, and in this culture, this often means that. Oh, this is why we need some guidance. It's a very important point. What else?
Дякую. Питання наступне.
Thank you. Here's my next question, not mine, but somebody else's. Hang on a second.
Як ми можемо поставити лише двомовних людей
How
на
can we
рівень з досвідченими
put
перекладачами?
people who speak different languages with interpreters on the same level? How to make sure they feel that they are at the same level? That was a question from Ernest. How to make sure they feel at the same level?
I hear the question.
Так.
Oh my goodness.
У нас
that's such a
є,
good
у нас
question.
є рука
I think the
Ернеста, ми
media-
можемо
okay, let me
просто
ask you
вімкнути
this.
звук, і він пояснить.
Let me ask you this. What should the mediator do in that case when everyone's speaking the same language and language is not the issue? Does the mediator not have the same problem in any language, even if everyone's speaking the same language?
Sorry, can you hear me now? I'm sorry for technical issues. So maybe that was the first question. Actually, I found already the answer for this. The question was a little bit different. So I think that there is still a bit of confusion, at least for me. Maybe I understood something wrong. We have different settings, and we also talked about it. So we have mediators with one interpreter in the room. We have 2 mediators and 2 interpreters. So each mediator has their own interpreter. We have also the mediator, for instance, this is the second setting. The third setting could be, we have a mediator that has a qualification, as you said, for instance, also as an interpreter. So interpreter and mediator as a one person. And we also could have, for instance, a mediator and interpreter at once, but these are 2 people working together. But as we also mentioned, that mediators cannot do the work of the interpreters and vice versa, so they should do that. They should do this independent work. So interpreters should do interpreter works, and mediators should do the work of mediators. But still, is there the best setting, like among all of this that I mentioned? Maybe there are any other settings that would impact the effectiveness of the mediation process?
I'm sorry, what is the last part? What are you actually?
So
I mean,
there are different.
Ernest, this sounds like a very complicated situation.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a very complicated question, because as I said, we have different settings and we have like interpreters, right? We have 2 interpreters and 2 mediators, for instance. Is it better?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I understood the setup, but what are you actually asking me to solve.
What is the best way to have the mediation with two interpreters, with one interpreter in the room, or maybe
Okay.
it's still better to have just an interpreter that can interpret what the mediator says, etc. So what is the best way of this communication and interpretation?
Well, I think we need to ask interpreters about that. I'm thinking it needs to be the simultaneous mode where the interpreting is happening at the same time as the speaking, rather than waiting for someone to say something and then it's translated. And I think there has to be a very important briefing beforehand where everybody, and there have to be breaks. There have to be breaks. We need to talk about what just happened. We need to talk about this word. And honestly, I think this is a huge conversation that you have invited us to consider, Ernest. It's a hard question and there's not an easy answer, but it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, it needs to be addressed, yes.
Yeah. I know we're short of time, but if there's any possibility of our interpreter having a moment to say something, I would really love to hear any response.
Барі, якщо ви не будете проти, то ми ще запитання вам надішлемо на імейл після
Barrie, if you
форуму.
don't mind, we're going to add more questions to your emails. And then we're going to share the answers, if you don't mind, of course,
I'm happy
at
to
a
do
later
that.
stage.
I'll be fascinated.
Так, тому що ми маємо ще запитання і однозначно буде...
Since we have many more questions and people are wondering to hear something more about some of the things that they are concerned with.
Okay.
And I think Barrie is trying to answer all and any questions. She'll be fascinated and happy to answer. I know exactly how eager she is to share feedback.
True.
Ми вам надзвичайно вдячні за цікаву дискусію.
We're
за
so
ваші-
much grateful to you for this brilliant discussion. Thank you very much for the outstanding presentation. Thanks a lot.
All right. And many thanks to the interpreter. Someday I would love to hear what you think.